To set the scene, the date is the 15th of December 2019 and Arsenal have just lost 3-0 at home to champions Manchester City in a game where Kevin De Bruyne ran riot against interim manager Freddie Ljungberg. The performance was lifeless and a display of what life had been like in the late days of Wenger and the Unai Emery tenure. But the most significant aspect of this game was not what took place on the pitch, but what was taking place on the Manchester City bench in the head of Pep Guardiola's assistant coach, Mikel Arteta. The ex-Arsenal captain looked on, knowing that he had one of the hardest jobs in world football to turn around his former club. 5 days later, Mikel Arteta was appointed as first-team coach, and in his first interview as manager, he spoke about demanding passion and aggression. He said he wanted to dominate, and he focused on environment, identity, and the culture of the club. Arteta watched his new side in a 0-0 draw from the stands at Goodison Park a day later. He then took charge of his first game away at Bournemouth on Boxing Day, drawing 1-1. His next 2 games at the Emirates came against Chelsea and Manchester United. Despite a 2-1 defeat at home to Chelsea, the energy and atmosphere was clearly back, and this carried through onto the United game where Arsenal won by 2-0. It felt like the Arteta era had begun. This January saw Arteta bring in his first 2 signings, Pablo Mari and Cedric Soares, on loans. It was another 2 months before Arsenal's next loss, which was the first real setback of Arteta's tenure. It came in a heartbreaking 2-1 loss at home to Olympiacos, which knocked out Arsenal of the Europa League and left their Champions League hopes all but lost. However, 2 weeks later, after a 1-0 win at home to West Ham, the landscape of football changed when the country went into lockdown due to a global pandemic. This was difficult and unknown territory for any manager, let alone a man 3 months into his managerial career. When Premier League football resumed again in June, Arsenal travelled to Manchester City to face Arteta's former employers. They were reduced to a 3-0 defeat where individual errors were prevalent. This was compounded with a defeat to Brighton, most notorious for the emergence of Emi Martinez. Back-to-back defeats meant a reaction was needed. Arteta changed to a 3-4-3 and won 4 games on the bounce. This clearly wasn't the style of play Mikel wanted to implement, but it was at a time where they had to adapt, and it meant they found themselves in an FA Cup semi-final. But before they played City at Wembley, they hosted the newly crowned champions of England, Jurgen Klopp's Liverpool. Despite utter dominance from the champions-elect, Arteta's side came out 2-1 winners, and Arteta made a point of the gap in quality between the 2 teams in his post-match interview. It was a statement, and a message to the Cronkies that investment was necessary. 3 days later, the apprentice defeated his old master as an Aubameyang brace inspired Arsenal to a 2-0 win against City, reaching the FA Cup final where they would play Chelsea. Aubameyang went on to score another 2 goals and Arteta won the FA Cup in his first 6 months. It was at this moment that he won the fans, which would prove valuable later down the line. The 2020-2021 summer saw the arrivals of Gabriel, Thomas Partey, Willian and Ceballos on another loan. At a section of the fan base's displeasure, Arteta throws out controversial figures as he didn't want to fracture the group. A Community Shield victory over Liverpool bred confidence going into the new season, but the next 6 months would be difficult as the transition from a back 3 to a back 4 proved challenging. The side struggled for consistency with the recurring injuries of Thomas Partey and Kieran Tierney. Arteta's job at one point looked vulnerable. It was at this point, however, that the club's hierarchy stood by the manager. The faith had transcended from the fans 6 months ago to the owners now. Arteta was winless in 7 league games and under pressure, so decided to turn to youth by starting Gabriel Martinelli, Emil Smith-Rowe and Bukayo Saka and coming out 3-1 victors against Frank Lampard's Chelsea. Arsenal needed a cost-effective signing to turn the season around and solve their lack of creativity, so they turned to Real Madrid to sign Martin Odegaard on loan. Despite the injection of energy into the side with the excitement of Saka and Smith-Rowe, Arsenal still struggled with individual errors, and although they had reached a Europa League semi-final, former manager Unai Emery and Villarreal dealt a dagger blow to our Champions League hopes. The season was ultimately deemed a poor one, and recruitment was now imperative as fans returned to the stadiums next season. The summer of 21-22 saw Arsenal's transfer strategy change to attract younger players with something to prove. The club brought in Benjamin White from Brighton for 50 million, Aaron Ramsdale for 30 million, Nuno Tavares, Sambi Lokonga, Takahiro Tomiyasu, and chose to sign Martin Odegaard permanently instead of Leicester's highly rated James Maddison. Fans anticipated the return of the well-regarded William Saliba from his 2 years out on loan. However, Arteta once more chose to loan out the Frenchman, believing the environment was not right for the defender. The season began terribly with a COVID outbreak ruling out a number of first-team players. This resulted in a 2-0 defeat to newly promoted Brentford. The aftermath saw Gary Neville question the direction of the club's recruitment, saying he doesn't know what the plan is at Arsenal. The outbreak and injuries restricted Arteta from using his preferred 11, and defeats to Chelsea and Man City followed. Arsenal now found themselves bottom of the league with 0 points, 0 goals scored and 9 goals conceded. Arsenal's season had only really begun when they hosted Spurs in the North London derby, with Saka and Smith Rowe starring as they blew their rivals away in the first half. It finished 3-1, and the atmosphere in the Emirates that day was the best since way before the pandemic. Before Arsenal travelled to Anfield in November, they were 10 unbeaten, but a 4-0 defeat was a reminder of the gulfing quality between themselves and the league's top two. Arsenal put a 5-game win streak together over Christmas before they hosted Pep Guardiola's men at the Emirates on New Year's Day. Mikel had tested positive for COVID-19 and was forced to watch the game from home, but this game, despite defeat, would go down as one of the games which signalled to the fans that we could compete at the highest level tactically. Arsenal went toe-to-toe with City, and if decisions had not gone against them that day, would have well-deservedly won the game but for a late winner from Rodri. Despite a spirited and resolute 0-0 at Anfield with 10 men, Arsenal struggled for the rest of January, and with doubts over the discipline of captain Aubameyang, Arteta made a ruthless and bold decision to force his underperforming talisman out. Arsenal failed to secure a replacement despite rumours of Dusan Vlahovic of Fiorentina being admired. It was a statement from Arteta that no player is bigger than the manager or the club, and while Arsenal suffered for large parts of the season, there was clear tactical progress which found them in with a strong chance of top four. Inevitably, the season fell away with core injuries, meaning that Arsenal ended the season with the likes of Rob Holding, Cedric and El Neni filling in. Capitulation away at Spurs and Newcastle meant that they missed out on Champions League to their North London rivals. Overall, the 21-22 season was a season of transition which brought its progress, and the blueprint was laid to build on over the summer. With rumours of Gabriel Jesus reuniting with his old coach, there was a positive vibe surrounding Arsenal during the 22-23 pre-season, and along with the return of William Saliba, Fabio Vieira and Zinchenko joined Jesus. Arsenal began the season with 5 wins on the bounce, playing incredible football. Wins against Spurs and Liverpool made the country take notice of Arsenal as early title contenders. They found themselves entering the World Cup mid-season break 5 points clear of Manchester City. After 19 games, Arsenal had reached 50 points. This 100-point pace did not last as they stumbled over February. But up until the injury to William Saliba in the Sporting Lisbon tie, Arsenal were playing like champions. The football on show in the Fulham game at Craven Cottage had a champions-like performance swagger to it. Although Arsenal had to go to Anfield without Saliba, in the first half an hour they blew Liverpool away. However, mistakes brought Liverpool back into the game, ending in a 2-2 draw. This set the tone for the next 2 slip-ups at West Ham and at home to Southampton. It allowed the juggernaut in Man City to claw themselves back into it and win their 3rd title in a row, securing a famous treble. It was a fantastic season, one that regained the belief of the fans, but it was a what could have been type season, and Arteta had to pick his men up to go again. In came Chelsea's Kai Havertz, Ajax's Jurrien Timber, Brentford's David Raya, and significantly, a signing that sent shockwaves through the Arsenal community. Declan Rice from West Ham for 105 million. More importantly, it was a signing that they had beat Manchester City to, indicating Arsenal's project and intentions to compete. The curtain raiser for the 23-24 season was a Community Shield showdown between last season's title rivals, and one Arteta's side managed to win on penalties. It felt significant psychologically for the club as they looked to beat City to the title this year. Arsenal's start to their Premier League campaign seemed like they were just getting over the line and pacing themselves, as opposed to the season beforehand, where they had started fast and ran out of steam. A Declan Rice winner at home to United was a great introduction to the fans as he quickly made people forget about his huge transfer fee. The return to Champions League was mature as Arsenal eased through their group despite an early hiccup away at Lens. But it was a notable 1-0 win in October to the champions where it was fine margins. It meant Arteta and Arsenal had finally got their City hoodoo off their backs. Late winners for Kai Havertz at Brentford and Rice at Luton indicated Arsenal was still experiencing teething problems with their Kai Havertz midfield experiment, and this really came to light in December when Arsenal lost to Villa, West Ham and Fulham. 3 losses on the bounce brought a trip to Dubai which drastically altered the course of Arsenal's season. Arsenal scored 31 goals in 8 Premier League games, only conceding 3 and qualified for the quarter-finals of the Champions League despite difficulty away at Porto. They won on penalties and it seemed like a huge moment of growth for a young and inexperienced group. The question was now of whether this group could maintain their title challenge instead of falling away. They travelled to the Etihad, a place where they were torn apart a year earlier, and became the first team not to concede there in 2 years, drawing 0-0 and staying in a solid position alongside City and Liverpool in the title race. April saw Arsenal's only hiccup of 2024, where Arsenal were narrowly knocked out of the Champions League by Bayern Munich and defeated at home to Unai Emery's Villa. For most Arsenal fans, this felt like the start of another capitulation. But Arsenal won their last 6 Premier League games, finishing on 89 points. It wasn't enough and City won their 4th title in a row, but once again Arteta has overseen a record-breaking season for the club and continued our promising trajectory. What he's done with the culture and feel surrounding our football club would have seemed impossible 4 years ago, and we are well and truly lucky to have him. If you enjoyed the video and want to see more, make sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.